Hi, everyone. Really good to see you all, or really good to virtually see you all. But today we're doing kind of a special webcast on the academic regulations and how they've changed over the past year. Now, obviously, this is an area that we've received considerable feedback from you on. And as you'll be aware, we worked closely with the university in devising these updated regulations, which now you'll know as the safety net. And that's a very extensive package of measures, which we're hoping today we can kind of outline and go over really the main pieces of feedback and questions that you've raised with us. As you obviously approach receiving your results following the conduction of your exams, we want to make sure that you have all the latest information so you can make the best decisions. And of course, we'll support you to do that. And with me, of course, is the very brilliant Jude Jensen. Jude, off to you.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Ramy. So I'm Jude Jensen. I am the manager of Brighton Students' Union Support Service. I lead a small team of advisors, and we are here to help students find their way through the mass of university regulations. And when they find themselves in conflict for some reason with the university, we're there to support them and guide them through those processes and empower them to reach the resolutions that they're seeking. So if you haven't heard of us, take a look at our web pages. You'll find lots of information there about who we are and what we do. And you can always make an appointment to come and see us. Virtually, of course, at the moment we are working remotely, so it will be as much of everything is at the moment online meetings that we'll have with you. But if you've got any questions, we're there for you.
Perfect. Thank you, Jude. And as Jude said, it really is important, specifically as you kind of reflect on these academic regulations. And if you have a very specific question in relation to your individual circumstances and how things may or may not apply to you, please do reach out to our very brilliant support service. So obviously, all of you will have known that last year, in March 2020, at the height of the lockdown, the first lockdown, the university implemented a no detriment approach, which obviously comprised of performance benchmarking. Now, that obviously was discontinued in September. And Jude, I think obviously we've received over the past year a lot of questions on that specific point, the discontinuation of performance benchmarking, and where perhaps there are some cases where students might still be awaiting performance benchmark from last year. And I think the point here really is we're trying to really clarify, I guess, that with this new safety net package, performance benchmarking, of course, has been discontinued, and that will not be in use of this year, correct? Because there is, of course, a replacement to that, which is the new algorithm. But before we go into that, if we can perhaps touch, Jude, with you on the issue of performance benchmarking.
Performance benchmarking, yes, as you say, used last year for deciding what the overall grades would be for students. That has largely been discounted for this year, and a new set of algorithms are going to be put in place. But for some courses, I add this as a precautionary caveat to our information that we're giving you today. For some courses, that IPBs will continue. If that is the case, then you would have been notified by your individual school. So if you haven't heard, then it doesn't apply. If you have heard, then it will apply to you, but there will be details about that from your school.
Jude, if we can also perhaps touch, obviously, students have reached out to yourselves and the support team to us quite extensively over the past year over the academic regulations. And before the safety net package obviously was released, we heard a lot from students about wanting similar protection to what performance benchmarking gave them last year. And really the challenge there, of course, was devising something that enabled that same level of protection, knowing full well that specific formula could not be used again. But obviously what we've now come to see this year is quite extensive. So obviously, I think from a student perspective, what's important to really note here is there's 3 dimensions or specific areas that we'd like to really draw your attention to. And it's important that you look at those individually, but also holistically, because each of them gives you as a student a range of options. And when you're looking at kind of what, a decision of, for instance, deciding whether you undertake rework for improvement under underrepresented performance policy, it's important to also look at the best of approach and what your final classification will be before you decide to do that. So obviously we have generic mitigation as one component, which is obviously the blanket mitigating circumstances that applies to all students. We have, alongside that in the safety net package, a mechanism to improve past marks where students have experienced exceptional circumstances, so unrepresented performance policy. And then, of course, finally, we have the best of approach, which revises the way that degree award classifications are calculated, which would essentially give the same level of protection and would do, using a different formula, what performance benchmarking did last year. Now, I think from a student perspective, it's important to draw your attention to, in many ways, it can be argued that the safety net package actually goes beyond what was done last year, in the sense that last year there was no facility for unrepresented performance, which there now is. Generic mitigation has been continued, and we obviously have an algorithm. Jude, if we can start off perhaps with generic mitigation, and how and what that specifically means, obviously, in the context of non-submissions and where students do not pass assessments.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So generic mitigation has replaced what we previously knew as mitigating circumstances. I don't want to dwell on what was in the past, but just to highlight the difference between those two things. It is still mitigating circumstances, but it's been given carte blanche to all students in recognition of the unprecedented difficulties that they've experienced through the pandemic. And that simply means that students will receive the benefit of exam board decision making when it comes to their grades. This will apply if you have not been able to submit your work, if you were not able to attend an examination or an OSCE or anything of that nature, a lab work, and it'll also apply if you were unsuccessful in passing, so you've not met the threshold for passing that particular assessment or module, then it will automatically apply.
And Jude, I think there's 2 points here really that are worth clarifying. One, I think from a student perspective, it's really important to know that obviously, while non-submission and failure, it automatically gets you essentially a piece of deferral work, there is another mechanism that's different where students will need to apply, which we'll get onto shortly, if they obviously pass but want to improve their marks. So it's important to make that differentiation. And two, of course, before we move on, I think it's important to also mention that while, of course, this safety net package, generic mitigation, and the other components apply to both undergraduate and postgraduate taught courses, there might be a small minority of courses perhaps where a deferral piece of work is not possible, or where an algorithm will have been revised in a certain way. So can we go into detail there? Now, again, while that impacts a minority of students, nonetheless, there will be some cases potentially where a student might not be able to receive this.
Absolutely, yes. So you're absolutely right in what you say, that it applies to both postgraduate taught students and undergraduate students, and also those students at our partner colleges as well. It's worth mentioning those. There are some exceptions. So, for instance, if your course has a professional statutory or regulatory board requirement to it, also known as a PSRB requirement, then it could be that elements of the safety net, such as the best of 80 credits, which we'll get onto later, might not apply. Again, if that's the case, your school will have been in touch with you about this. If it's not the case, if you're not affected by PSRB, then the school will not have been in touch with you, and so you don't need to worry about that.
Perfect. And if we can move on perhaps to the second aspect of the safety net package. So last year, obviously, we received quite a lot of feedback from students who had passed, obviously, their assessments, but nonetheless felt their work was not representative of their full potential, and who at the time, of course, had to accept the mark that they received because there was no mechanism to enable them to improve a passed mark. Now, obviously, this year, the landscape has changed. So in response to student feedback, of course, we worked with the university, and there is now a new unrepresented performance policy that's also part of the safety net package. Now, as Jude has already said, and we've highlighted, that unlike generic mitigation, which applies to all students for non-submissions and failures, unrepresented performance is different because it does require an application. And of course, it's only for students that have actually passed and who would like to improve their mark. Now, it's of course worth highlighting there, Jude, that it is still in relation to exceptional cases in the sense that a student will have been impacted, by an adverse event in their life, whether that's COVID or non-COVID related. But there's an application process to this, and I think it's really important that we go obviously through that. So if we can perhaps start off with there.
Yes, by all means. So, as Ramy has mentioned, there is a form that needs to be used as part of this application process, and the form is available both online on the university web pages. It's available from ourselves. It'll be available from your school offices and a number of other places as well. And we'll probably post details of that in the links at the end of this podcast for you. So there's a form. You need to fill that out, and you need to basically state why it is you feel that your performance has been affected and what were the circumstances that led to that effect on your performance. So, as Ramy has said, this is exceptional in that it will be something that is out of the ordinary. It could be a spike in an existing condition, but it will be something that has affected you in a way that you did not foresee and that you were not expecting to happen to you. But you can clearly see has had an impact on your grades and on your results. And as a result of that, you want then to make the exam board aware of it so that they can reconsider how best to address your assessments and the grades that they award to those. So you'll need to complete a form, and as I mentioned, you'll need to make a statement about what has affected you and how it has affected you. If you're able to provide evidence of that, so if it was something simple as being unwell for a period of time, then you might consider getting evidence from your GP, from your doctor, or some other medical professional or therapist, stating that you were unwell during that period of time, and that period of time must relate to, when it was you were either studying for that assessment or taking that assessment. Those two timelines must marry up. You then make this application to your school. They will process it and they will advise you whether that has been accepted or not. There is a very tight deadline. I must emphasize that there's a very tight deadline of 14 days in which to make your application for unrepresented performance. And that date starts from when you receive the results ratified by your exam board. So the date that you get your results saying these are your grades for the end of the year, not just the ones that appear on Student Central that have been being posted up throughout the year. These are the ones that come after the exam board. Once you've received those, you'll then have 14 actual days in which to make a claim for unrepresented performance.
And Jude, really the important, and this I guess takes us back to the first, and no, I'm not just being nice to you, Jude, here, because I think you're brilliant, but it's really important that obviously students do reach out, whether it's to yourselves in the support team, whether it's to their SSGT, their personal tutor, in relation to this specific aspect of the safety net. The reason being, obviously, is because there's another component to the safety net, which is the algorithm. And in some cases, obviously, a student might wish to perhaps reattempt a piece of work that they've passed, but ultimately it might well be that credit will have been discounted if it was their lowest performance or among their lowest 40 credits. So in that sense, they would be perhaps putting themselves to additional work that they might not need to. And that's why perhaps we keep saying that it's really important that, one, you do reach out to us for advice and guidance on this, and that you consider the holistic picture here, because we would not want you to sit through assessments that you might not need to, considering the other mitigation that's at play here. Now, obviously, if we can perhaps now go into really the best of approach. Now, the best of approach is obviously the new algorithm, which changes how degree awards are calculated. Last year, what did that obviously was performance benchmarking, which obviously could not be used in the same manner as such, because performance benchmarking looked at a specific number of credits, depending on how many credits were achieved in the first semester. If there wasn't 40 credits achieved in that first semester, it had to then look at the previous year. And we didn't want to end up in a situation this year where we are comparing students obviously against previous cohorts, which obviously isn't fair to do. And because that credit had already been benchmarked, that then drew that into question. So obviously the algorithm, the best of approach, was devised to ensure that students were given the same level of protection, obviously, as performance benchmarking, but through a new mechanism. Now, normally, Jude, obviously, for most students, of course, degree awards are calculated where 75% is attributed to 120 credits achieved over level 6, which is the final year, plus 25% of the credits that have been achieved, again, 120 credits in level 5. That obviously has changed now to the best of 80. So, Jude, if you can tell us a bit more about that.
Yes, absolutely. Be happy to. So best of 80 includes in the title, really. As Ramy has already mentioned, each year is made up of 120 credits to make a normal undergraduate degree and indeed postgraduate degrees, but they have the also have the included in the final element, making them more credits. But putting that aside for a moment, so for level 5 and level 6, how it will work is that students will receive the marks for the best 80 credits in that year. So whether it be level 5 or level 6 or even level 7, students will receive the best 80 credits achieved. So if you, for instance, received marks in modules A and B, 40 credits, sorry, 40%, but in modules C, D, and E, you achieved 60%. What will happen is that your algorithm will be calculated so that your overall score for that year will be 60%, therefore ignoring modules A and B, where you scored the 2 lower sets of grades. Does that make sense?
And obviously, it's really worth important and noting here that obviously it applies both to undergraduates and of course to postgraduate taught students.
Yes.
And it's also worth noting, of course, that this doesn't just apply to final year undergraduate students. It does also apply to level 5 students. And there was obviously a commitment to also explore further at some point how it would be applicable to our level 4 students, even though, of course, level 4 does not contribute towards the final classification.
Absolutely correct, yes. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better.
And when we obviously look closely at the algorithm, again, this is why we obviously then go back to the point of making sure that we're looking at the bigger picture here, because if we look, for instance, at an example of a student who, let's say, has achieved a first across 4 of their modules, each worth 20 credits, and a 2-1 across the other 2 modules worth 40 credits. Now, that student might end up in a situation where perhaps they would average either a low first or a high 2-1 in a normal situation. However, obviously, when those are discounted, they would average the first. Now, if a student was to then reattempt actually to improve their marks through underrepresented performance, those marks would still be discounted either way. So they'd be putting themselves, you could say, through additional work they might not need to be doing, because it would not actually make a material difference to their classification.
Absolutely right. Yes, I think the grade improvement or the mitigating circumstances for unrepresented performance is going to apply to a very few number of students who need, for some reason, to get their grades over a particular classification line.
And if we can also perhaps to go a bit more now where this will not apply. So performance benchmarking, if we draw back to that same analogy last year, obviously a student would have had to pass first before performance benchmarking could be applied. And similarly this year, obviously a student will need to one, submit their work and pass it. Obviously, if we now go back and kind of carry through, if they're unable to pass, if they do not pass or they're unable to submit, they would get an automatic deferral, except the very small cases where that's not applicable. If they pass and perhaps get a lower mark because of an adverse impact of experience, there's a policy there to enable them to obviously improve their marks. But obviously, before the algorithm can be applied, a student will need to have submitted and passed their assessment. And after that point, it will be applied, correct?
Yes, absolutely correct. Yeah.
And obviously, that's why I think because then we go into the question of, obviously, we fully appreciate that students will be experiencing vastly different circumstances, and sometimes it's just simply not possible to submit. But obviously, if you're experiencing a circumstance that's more short-term, where an extension would be applicable, then of course we would encourage you to apply to that. And it's important and worth noting that this year, obviously, extension requests do not require evidence. Now, obviously, you cannot apply retrospectively for an extension, but you can apply obviously ahead of time for an extension, and you will not be required to submit evidence. But I think what's important and really worth noting here is that while, of course, decision to submit is up to a student individually, we also don't want students to end up in a situation where they're not submitting a lot of work that they might be able to actually do, because that can add additional complications, Jude, correct? So we can perhaps discuss that a bit.
Sure, absolutely. So it'd be a really risky strategy then if you were thinking that, oh, great, I could defer all of my assessments or majority of my assessments until a later date. You could end up in that situation repeating a year of study. So we wouldn't ever suggest that be your first line of thought, your first sort of go-to action, we would absolutely suggest that you come and speak to either ourselves or to your personal tutor, maybe even your SSGT, to help you make the right choices based on your own circumstances. Of course, they're going to be individual circumstances, and that's when it's worth talking to somebody, perhaps ourselves, about what might be the best way forward for you. As I mentioned, deferring all of your assessments, or the large majority of your assessments, is a really risky strategy. So don't think that is an option that you should readily or easily take up. It's one that you should proceed with caution, and in most circumstances, I would strongly advise against it.
Thank you, Jude. And finally, perhaps if we can also discuss that there will be some courses, for instance, our students on nursing health sciences courses, where they've had a revised algorithm, of course, applied, depending, because obviously those courses are governed by professional body requirements, PSRB requirements. So those, Jude, correct, will some of them will have obviously a different they will have an algorithm, but a different algorithm applied than the one that has been applied across other courses.
Yes, that is indeed correct. And they have all been individually worked out between the school and the university's academic departments, who ensure that the rigour of the learning and the teaching and the assessment is upheld. And you can have confidence that your University of Brighton degree is worth all of your hard work. So that's been agreed amongst those people, and there is information regarding that available from your school. So if you have been affected by those differences to any of the regulations, then you will have been notified individually by your school as well.
Perfect. And if we can perhaps kind of, I guess, walk through this, perhaps kind of more of a summary, because obviously this is very, very tricky. A lot here at play, a lot of different aspects. But I think the key takeaway here is that, one, you will be supported to kind of reach your full potential. And that might sound very cheesy, but that really is the purpose of this safety net package, that whatever your circumstances are, there are different routes for you to ensure that you do pass, you progress, you graduate with the grades that you've worked for, and that recognize, obviously, the vastly different circumstances under which you've been studying, but at the same time ensure that kind of the academic rigor of your degree is upheld. And of course, as we said, first of all, there's three different components. So generic mitigation, unrepresentative performance, and then an algorithm, which is the best 80 credits for most of our courses. Now, generic mitigation, Jude, as we said before, applies blanket across all students. They do not need to apply for that. And that applies for, obviously, where a student cannot attend an exam, does not submit, or does not pass. And they'll get an automatic deferral, except in the very few cases where that's not possible. Beyond that, obviously, where a student does pass an assessment but was impacted by an unfortunate circumstance in their life and would like to improve their mark to ensure it's reflective of their profile and of their achievement, they can undertake unreserved performance, but they have to apply for that within 14 days, obviously, of receiving their ratified official results. And they use one form for all assessments for which they're submitting. And then obviously beyond that, as an overarching piece, is the new algorithm, which changes how your degree awards are classified. So it's the best 80 credits in level 5 and in level 6 are now contributing rather than 120 credits. So for most courses, except the ones that have been directly contacted by their schools, your 40 least performing or lowest performing credits will be discounted in calculating classifications. Now, Jude, if we can perhaps touch finally on the issue of unrepresented performance. Now, rework versus new work. The understanding, of course, is that for the vast majority pieces of work, these will be new assessments, correct, that students are attempting?
That is correct. Yes, absolutely correct. In the vast majority of cases, that is the situation, yes. In some instances, for instance, where it might be a very large piece of work, maybe your final major project or your dissertation, it could be that the decision is made that actually you get to rework that because it would just be not possible for you to do all of that work that you've been doing over the last 9 or 12 months in a short period of time during the August resit period. So in those circumstances, it's most likely that you'll be offered a rework, but for all other instances, we're fully expecting that students will receive requests to do a new piece of work. So that won't be, it'll be similar to what you have done, but it won't be exactly the same.
Perfect. And that kind of, I guess, takes us through a whistle-to-stop world of academic regulations. But I think the key takeaway message is that really we're just very grateful for you raising all the feedback that you did throughout the last year. We know this is an issue that is very important to all of you. We know the pandemic has impacted your achievement. You're studying under vastly different circumstances. It's important that our regulations are flexible enough. The university regulations are flexible enough to accommodate that and to recognize that. And really this extensive package of measures goes in doing that and addressing that. So thank you for raising the feedback that you did. And of course, particular thanks to our colleagues in the university who worked very hard, of course, to devise all of this. And any departing thoughts, Jude? I mean, mine is very quite simple. Jude and her team are very brilliant. So please do reach out to them if you need any support in kind of reflecting on decisions that you might want to take. But Jude, I'm sure you'll have a more eloquent wrap up than I just did there.
Well, thank you for the kind words. I'm not sure that I do. I think, everyone recognises that it's been an incredibly difficult year, longer than a year, going into 18 months now for students with the pandemic, and before that, the industrial action. It has been incredibly difficult, and everyone within the university, including, university staff and BSU staff, have all worked and rallied together to try to find ways to fix this for students. There can be no do-over, but what they've done is try to smooth the way so that the impact doesn't have, so that the pandemic doesn't have quite the impact it would have done had they operated under the old regulations. They're trying to make sure that students can progress, that they can have confidence that their assessments are rigorous and that their degree is duly awarded. And so, as you say, thanks to students for making us aware of what they've been facing, but also thanks to colleagues within the university and union staff to help students through that and help find the resolution to the issues.
And Jude, of course, if I may, even though we work in the same order, thanks to you and your team, because I know that you've taken a lot. You've offered just incredible support to students, and I'm sure that they're very grateful for it. But without further ado, we'll wrap up today. But please do send us any additional questions that you have, any queries that you have, and please do reach out to the support team at BSUsupport at brighton.ac.uk if you would like to discuss anything further. Jude, any departing thoughts before we wrap this up?
We're always very happy to talk to students and assist them in whatever way we can. We have to operate within the university guidelines, of course, within the university regulations, I should say. But that doesn't mean to say that we can't be creative in helping students find resolutions to the issues that they face. So yeah, don't hesitate to get in touch with us. We're here. We're working all through the summer. We only close on university closure days, so that's basically Christmas and bank holidays. We're here throughout the year. We'll be here throughout the summer. So if you need to talk to us about your results and whether you want to apply for the unrepresented performance or whether you don't, then we're happy to chat to you about that as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jude, very much so. And thank you to everyone else.
Thank you, Ramy.